Hello, welcome to Baltic World. My name is Crispin. You would have heard a great deal in recent times about the Himars, these weapon systems provided by the United States to Ukraine, which allegedly reshaped the entire battle space. Now, most of the time, a lot of this is propaganda, hyperbole, but in this case, it is absolutely true. So much so, you could say the entire conflict has entered a whole new phase. I'm going to read a report today from Al Jazeera and go into detail about the nature of this weapons platform and how things have altered in an irreparable way in the east of the country, giving Ukraine a real chance to win this war in a straight-up conventional fight. The article I have is titled "The Russians Have Nothing Equivalent: How Himars Help Ukraine." The US-made system has struck Russia's advance and is the weapon of choice on NATO's eastern flank. The M142 Himars, the high-mobility artillery rocket system supplied to Ukraine by the United States, have become a symbol of Russian vulnerability. In the occupied southern Kherson Oblast, posters appeared in July featuring a picture of a Himars system and words threatening retribution on the Russians for a range of things. Now, the Eastern European countries most worried about a future Russian attack are arming themselves. Poland and the Baltic states have drawn the lesson that they are among the most effective weapons in stopping the Russian advance in Ukraine and are ordering hundreds of launch systems at a cost of hundreds of millions of dollars. Polish Defense Minister Mariusz Błaszczuk, obviously butchered that, announced on 26th of May that he had requested 500 Himars launchers plus ammunition, an enormous number, which he said would involve extensive co-production. And I'll get into the scale of that a little bit later. Estonia would buy 6 launchers and ammunition worth $500 million, the US Department of State said on July 15. Latvia made public its request for $300 million in launchers and rockets a week later, and Lithuania is expected to follow suit. Quote, "The agreement to unblock Odessa would have been impossible without Himars. It's now very clear that the war will end earlier if we arm Ukraine faster," Lithuanian Foreign Minister Gabrielius Landsbergis said on July 22nd, referring to Russia's agreement to allow Ukrainian grain shipments through the Black Sea. "The Baltics will become a single theatre of war for Russia," said Estonian Defence Minister Kusti Salm, explaining the region coordination on defence procurements. Latvia and Estonia have talked about acquiring the latest 300-kilometre ATACMs, Army Tactical Missiles, for their launches. From the Estonian border, they would easily be able to strike St. Petersburg. From Latvia, they would be able to hit halfway to Moscow, impeding any invasion force long before it reached the border. From the Polish and Lithuanian borders, they could strike almost anywhere on the territory of Belarus, Moscow's only regional ally, whose territory was used as a marshalling ground to attack Kiev, not to mention the possibility of attacking all of Kaliningrad. "We will force our enemy to hike the price of aggression. If they know we can destroy certain kinds of targets, they will have to start looking for alternative solutions. However, they are notably more expensive. Attacking Estonia, Baltic countries, and NATO will become a lot more complicated and expensive for the enemy," said Salm. The United States Armed Forces are to bring an even more advanced Himars launch rocket, the Precision Strike Missile, with a 500-kilometre range, into the field next year. Should that be supplied to regional allies, they would be able to hit in the vicinity of Moscow. We'll leave it there and talk more about the systems themselves. Himars have 3 massive advantages over their Russian counterparts: range, precision, and mobility. In terms of range, the United States is providing missiles of around 80 to 100 kilometers in effective range, provided the Ukrainians don't use them on targets within Russia itself, noting that Crimea is part of Ukraine. This outranges Russian artillery, meaning that when Russian artillery is bombarding cities and other targets, the Himars could retaliate against those launch areas. It can do so without fear that a Russian artillery barrage is going to hit the Himars in return. And yet it is in accuracy and precision that the Himars have come into their own. Russia fully expected that its S-400 system would shoot down incoming Himar missiles, and yet proved utterly impotent to do so. Himars have destroyed dozens of Russian artillery ammunition depots. So during the month of June, which was Russia's best month of the war, it was firing 60,000 artillery shells every single day. Russia's strategy after failing to take over the west of the country was to pulverize the east and annex eastern Ukrainian territories, demoralize the Ukrainians fighting in that region with no way of retaliating. During the month of June, Russia was outnumbering Ukrainian artillery fire 10-1. And this is the absolute backbone of Russian military strength. So if you can neutralize Russia's artillery advantage, then Russia is highly vulnerable. But in order to maintain that high rate of fire, the ammunition needs to be really close to where the artillery is going to fire. You can't just wait for trucks to travel across hundreds of kilometers to provide relatively small numbers of shells. You need to have large depots constantly resupplied that troops can run back and forward and continue a high rate of fire. Well, these depots have proven extremely vulnerable to the Himars system, absolutely decapitating Russia's artillery strength. Since the Himars have been introduced, Russian artillery fire, noting that it doesn't even have the range of the Himars, Russian artillery fire has fallen by more than 90%. The Ukrainians have completely neutralized this advantage. And when I say precision, I mean on a truly surgical scale. At the moment, between 8 and 12 Himars are in service in Ukraine, each one firing up to 12 missiles per day. So not a huge rate of fire in the scheme of things. In fact, America's military ordnance stockpile for its entire Himar force is only a couple of months worth of use at this level, and therefore, obviously, ordnance is being rapidly produced. And yet, despite these relatively modest numbers, Russia's artillery has been brought to its knees. It's no surprise that Ukraine is eagerly, thirstily wanting more Himars deployed. The only thing that's really stopping this is the rate of training, because in the United States, each Himar operator has about 6 months worth of training before they're put into the field. They've massively condensed that for Ukrainian training. Nevertheless, it still takes time. Also, there needs to be sufficient targets for the Himars to be effectively employed, and also they need to be protected. Which brings me to the third advantage, mobility. Being a road mobile launcher is quite rare outside the strategic space. We have these kinds of systems for long-range ICBMs, nuclear weapons, that sort of thing. But for high-precision battlefield use, this shoot-and-scoot mechanism is extremely effective, because by the time the Russians even know what's happening, the Himars have already retreated to hard and deeply buried facilities. Those facilities must be constructed and protected and hidden before new Himars are introduced. We don't want to lose these weapons platforms to Russian airstrikes, for example. So Russia boasted that it would have no impact when they were introduced and that Russia would simply destroy them. And yet at the time of this recording, not only has Russian artillery in East Ukraine fallen by more than 90%, the United States has denied that Russia has destroyed any of the Himars systems thus provided. So why is this such a game changer? Well, first of all, it's massively reduced Ukrainian casualties, which had been experiencing terrible shrapnel wounds, being crushed under flowing debris. Also, the Ukrainians were beginning to become demoralized. They were unable to go on rapid offensive because they were being totally bombarded 24 hours a day by high-intensity artillery fire. That has been neutralized. So the Ukrainians are now experiencing a massive morale boost. They believe they can win this thing in east of Ukraine, and time is now on their side. The longer this goes on, the more advanced weapon systems will flow into Ukraine. And as of today, President Zelensky has said that nearly 40,000 Russians have been killed in Ukraine so far. So the tide is genuinely turning, but more than that, Ukraine can plan a major offensive, and this will be the grand new phase of the war. Recently, Russia has started issuing passports in the occupied territories in east of Ukraine. This is the clearest indication yet that Russia plans to outright annex these territories. The only way that Ukraine will be able to regain its sovereign land will be to take it by military force. This is very different to holding cities and protecting oneself in highly urbanized areas where the population is against Russia. This means carrying out a major assault with heavy armor supported by infantry and air power over flat terrain against hard and deeply buried targets that are entrenched by Russian defenders. This is an enormous undertaking and without doubt will be the bloodiest phase of the war. It was thought as recently as a few weeks ago that was a bit of a pipe dream, that we might actually have to live with Russia occupying east of Ukraine in perpetuity, but that is no longer the case. Ukraine can build up its armed forces, plan out a major offensive, and using more Himars and other systems, neutralizing Russia's artillery advantage, actually take the fight to Russia. Russia could lose in an outright military fight against Ukraine. Nobody thought that prior to the 24th of February. The idea that in open battlefield, Ukraine could be superior to Russian armed forces and bring Russia to its knees, this could be the end of Russia's imperial ambition. Now, I say this in a highly cavalier way, but we should recognize that this will absolutely be the worst, most bloody phase of the war. It's about to become a meat grinder as Russia claims this territory as its own and Ukraine seeks to regain the territory that it has lost. Both sides will feel heavily invested in winning this thing, and Russia will continue to throw more and more resources at it to avoid giving any ground. This would be the greatest humiliation of the Russian Federation since its loss to Japan in 1905-1906. So it has every reason to go to the mat on this. The casualties will be absolutely enormous. But this is the way Ukraine will be thinking now. They'll be building up their heavy armor. They'll be incorporating new weapons platforms provided by allies and others, and a huge infantry force in order to retake the east in the name of Slava Ukraine. Hopefully they succeed. I'll keep you obviously updated with developments as they occur, but don't underestimate the impact that Himars have had. Before the Himars were introduced, Ukraine was fighting to prevent utter defeat, and now they are pushing for victory. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.